Now we want to figure out the best way that we want to trigger this particular cutscene. You see that it's already triggering, and the reason is because if you go down to intro, like your playable director, and it actually has play on awake checked. Now you could do this technically, but I'll show you the disadvantage. You see if I hit play, you see how I can control my character while that's playing? I don't want to do that. And in order to lock out the player's controls properly, I actually want to control when this cutscene starts playing as well. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to disable play on awake, and I'm going to make my own script to specify when this thing should play. And I'm going to make a script wherever you're putting your project asset. So this previous one where I made my timeline asset. What do we want to call this script? Let me see here. We call this level start cutscene, I think would make sense. But before we do that, I want to remind you of where we are and what we need to do. So these are the game, this could be the drop ship and we're controlling the position. This could be the camera, we're controlling the position and rotation or whatever. And this is our cutscene, our intro cutscene object. And on here we have the playable director. Now our timeline asset is linked up and we, has all our track data in it. But we still need to access the playable director and we need to tell it to play. And then whatever timeline is in there, it will play. So we want to do that through a script. It's one of many ways to do it. So I want to show you some options. So again, make sure that you disable this play on awake. Otherwise, it's just it might even trigger twice, and that would be bad. And we are going to make a new C# script. Yeah, we're coding. All right, create C#. Call this level start cutscene. Something very obvious. And I'm just going to apply this to our intro object right here, because this is typically where you'd go to turn on and off play on awake. I'm just going to make my own custom one. So make sure that you attach this script to the game object, the same one with the playable director. And actually, that's all we need. So let's open up the script. And just in case, or actually, let's start setting up some of our stuff. So let's do here. Now, if you want to access a playable directory through script, you need to add the namespace at the top. And if that sounds confusing, just add the keyword using Unity Engine.playables. And what we want to do up here is we want to leave a little container or hookup for which playable director we want to use. So I'm going to do serialized field, so bracket serialized field. This will just expose it in the inspector so we can drag and drop a reference in there. Of type, well, we want the playable director component. If you don't see this pop up like that, it means that you didn't add this line right here. And we'll call this director. Okay. Now we want to lock out the player's controls as well. And just to save you a little bit of digging, this is going to be inside of something called the player input script. But if you start typing, you're not going to see anything. And this is because this script is inside of the 2DGameKit namespace as well. So I'm going to add another one at the top using GameKit 2D. Just like that. And we'll have player input, call that player input, player input. All right, so here's what I want to do. In start, so void start. I'm just going to walk you through the logic. If our director does not equal null, meaning that if there is something in the director, meaning we actually did drop something in there, then we want to play it, because we don't want to try to play it if there's nothing in here. So it's just a little check here, just make sure we're doing it right. Then, so when this gets called when the level starts, if this is attached to an object, when the level starts, play the director. So we're just doing exactly how we had before, where we were playing on awake. However, we're going to add an additional line here. If player input is not equal null, meaning that we actually specified the player input as well, then player input dot little function called release control. This means take control away of the player temporarily until we give it back. And we're going to pass in true, and this is just resetting the jump, attack values, all that kind of stuff. We just want to just take away the player control and reset everything. Okay, so then now we're going to do something called we're going to add an event listener. And there's an event that gets called when the director stops playing. And this is called director.stopped. And you'll see it pop up with a little lightning bolt. Stopped. Okay? So to add an event listener, we're just going to hit plus equals return, plus equals, and then we're going to give it a function to call whenever this director.stopped event calls. So whenever it stops playing, it wants to run a function. So we're going to add this function to this event, and we're going to jump down here real quick and call this void return player control. This is whatever you decide to name it. So we're defining it here, but I'm going to call it this. It needs to take in a type of playable director. Call that director. Okay, and the only reason it needs to take this in is because if we want this event if we want to call this function from this event, this event needs us to specify this thing. So we'll just hit plus equals and then just give it the name, return player control, right there. Whatever you named it down here, this just has to be the same, right? So when the director stops playing, it will call this function. And all this function is going to do is just say, hey, player input dot gain control. We want to give control back to the player. And lastly, this is just kind of a good practices thing. We're going to remove the listener from this event because we don't want it, for whatever reason, if we called it again, we don't want it to call this unless we specify. So we'll say director, again, this is the playable director right here. Or actually, no, sorry, this is the one that we're sending. Interesting. Well, it's coming from the same director, so it should be fine. Director dot stopped. And actually, this is a good point. I actually want to specify that I want the director up at the top, not the director that it just passed me. So I'm going to say this dot director. And what that means is in the case of having two variables of the same name, we put this, it's going to say use the director that belongs up here at the very top, like the field up here. If that's confusing, don't worry about it. Just add the word this dot director dot stopped minus equals return player control. All right, double check and make sure that we don't have any errors or anything. And we should be good to go. So make sure you save as well. Control S. I don't always call that out. It's just muscle memory. Minimize this. Now make sure that you actually applied the script up here. It will compile. And once it's done compiling, you'll see two slots pop up. It needs to know which playable director, and it needs to know where the player input script is. So for the first one, we're just going to drag and drop this component from here to there. For any of you programmers out there, you might know that you can just do an auto search for that since it's on the same object. For now, just keep it easy. You can just drag and drop. Maybe you had this as a trigger somewhere else and you wanted to specify a different playable director. We're going to keep that modular. Okay, so make sure that that's filled in. Secondly, we want to find the player input, and that's going to exist on the player. So I'm going to click Ellen and drag right there. Okay, so now if we hit play, if we have all this set up and play on awake is not happening, we cannot move the player during the cutscene, and after the cutscene's done, we can. Okay, so congratulations. We just created our first intro cutscene. You can do even more with this. Like you can trigger other cutscenes on a trigger enter or something if you want to be fancy, but maybe spruce it up, like make it look cooler, have other animated objects. Just make sure that you're handling everything down here. And if you don't need it to be active after the cutscene, you're turning it back off. So make sure you do that. But otherwise, keep experimenting and keep messing around with this timeline stuff.